Howdy all you delicious people, I'm here today to review Smallville Season 2, Episodes 16 and 17. So, I was to record this review before, and for some odd reason, every time I was doing the review, I just had this bug that was just kind of flying around and got very distracted. Um, but not only that, um, just getting distracted as far as organization is to go into, simply because there's so many different shows and so many things that I want to accomplish, and I'm trying to figure out a way to organize having not so much TV crammed together in one day. So I'm trying to figure out where it's all to fit in and where I should go on and put things. So we'll see what happens per every day. But anyways, so 16 and 17. So episode 16, the thing that I enjoy about it most is we have Martha, who gets more screen time and has some interesting story for her to go on and do. Whereas in episode 17, we of course have a lot of people would probably easily say that episode 17 of season 2 is a fan favorite episode. For me, I feel that episode 17 does have a hefty amount of dialogue, and so really for episode 17, I was like, I don't think it's one of my favorite episodes, but it's probably in the top 10, because, of course, there are other times when other Superman are to appear on the show, but still. Christopher Reeves being on here was really great. I really enjoyed it, and for what he had to deliver as far as trying to help out Clark in episode 17 was really fun. Plus, we technically had Clark fly a little bit in this episode, even though it was in a dream sequence in the cave. So, let's go on and let's be a little bit cryptic, but a little bit spoilery of what happens in episode 16 and 17. So, in episode 16, it seems that not only is Martha going to get sick in this episode, also so is Clark. And we go on to seem to have Chloe, who is to pour her heart out to Clark to just really have her thing go on to kind of backfire on her. And then she is to get very emotional, and by the very next episode, we have Chloe, who is to reveal to Lana what had happened when she had gone on and talked to Clark in his sleep. So we seem to have Helen that is to also have to know Clark's secret in episode 16. And so come to find out that also has Lex, who is also kind of needing to sneak around, get certain information, because of course Lex being very nosy. And so episode 16 was fun, but there was also some goofy things going on into that episode also. And then episode 17, we of course have Clark that is desperately needing to go on and find out answers from his biological parents. And Clark then turns around and is to get to be able to read Kryptonian, and is to meet up with Dr. Swan to find certain messages that Clark's biological parents had left him without him realizing. And then also, Clark is to have these bouts of him uh, falling asleep in locations and waking up, and it seems that Lex is to uh, want to try and take care of Clark, and they're trying to figure out what is going on with him. So, with that said, let's go on into the double five time territory because it's just about that time to just want to go into, of course, what is spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time you're going to spoil these episodes. So, but episode 17 probably in top 10 favorite episodes. 16. Besides what I liked, what they did with Martha, just we still have another 2 episodes without the Freak of the Week element or a villain or anything like that. I can understand trying to change and try to do something different to get away from the Freak of the Week formula, but I'm like, man, like, we've had too many episodes without that kind of Freak of the Week formula. I'm really starting to, like, really just go on like, man, I can't wait till we get another villain, like, less like complex story, especially with 17 having so much dialogue. So, with that said, let's go into it. So, in the beginning of the episode 16, we have Clark, who is to make his way into the cellar, realizing that Martha is down there. So, Clark is to mention that Jonathan and him were going to go to the store to pick something up to fix this pipe. And I think it's under the same sink that they fixed sometime before. I would assume. So, but Clark is to find out that they have the parts at home, and so both Clark and Jonathan are to try and fix this, and Clark is to ask Jonathan if he wants some spot welding, but it seems that Jonathan is to just say that Clark will just slow him down. So, yeah, so Clark is to talk to Martha, who is in the cellar, and she is trying to hide that flower container, which had the octagonal shape from before. So, Clark leaves for Martha, and Martha is to dig this hole to hide this flower container. But that all of a sudden is to bring up a bunch of Kryptonian dust, or Kryptonian things that go into Martha's system. And when she ends up going into the house and is to talk to both Clark and Jonathan, all of a sudden she has this coughing fit that is to have her drop this pitcher, and the pitcher breaks, and Martha is to almost fall directly on the pitcher to possibly have it stab into her. Clark uses his super speed to stop Martha from falling, and when both Jonathan and Clark are trying to wake up Martha, it seems that she will not wake. So they end up rushing Martha to the hospital, and come to find out when Jonathan is talking to Helen, Helen is to let Jonathan know that Martha is pregnant. Jonathan's like, well, that's impossible because Martha can't get pregnant. And so we have Helen who's like, well, like the information doesn't lie. So Jonathan's like, okay, well, it seems that Martha is like not telling me something. So we have Lex that appears and is to go off and talk to Helen. It seems that Helen is going to go on and like continue to follow up on her studies and take an opportunity that will probably lead to Helen and Lex at some point separating. And Lex is to go on and tell Helen, it's like, well, hey, like, don't pass up this opportunity. And the funny thing of it is Lex is telling like Helen, yeah, go on and like continue your education, but then also Lex is to give Helen this key to say like, well, I think that we should like uh, take our relationship to the next step. So it's kind of like there's a lot of all over the place for this, but anyways, so Jonathan goes on to speak with Martha to say it's like, well, hey, like, how is it that you are now pregnant and why didn't you tell me? And Martha's like, well, I thought if I told you it wouldn't have happened and or that it wouldn't have come true. And Martha was to say that when she was with the ship last, it seems that somehow the ship has healing properties and that now Martha is to be healed and she can now be pregnant, it seems. That's how they weirdly rationalize it in this show. Oddly enough. So, uh, and so also Jonathan is to ask Martha, it's like, why was she hiding the octagonal shape? And Martha ends up stating that's like, well, like the reason for that is because like I was afraid that if Clark was to get this octagonal shape and put it into the cave or put it into the ship to get information from his biological parents, that like he would either leave them or like he would um like accept his biological parents over uh Jonathan and Martha, so on and so forth. So we have Helen uh, that is to go on and find out that the CDA has arrived and they want to figure out the origin of Martha's illness to help her because she is going to possibly die without their help. So the CDA is to want to infiltrate the Kent farm, and Jonathan is to tell Clark, it's like, well, hey, you need to get rid of the ship. So Clark super speeds his way to the farm before the CDA get there, and Clark is trying to move the ship onto this truck and put this tarp on it, and so all of a sudden, Clark, while quickly trying to get to the ship, all of a sudden is to brush up some of that kryptonite into Clark's system to start to make Clark very sick, to the point where Clark is driving with Pete to get to Pete's place so they can hide the ship, and Clark all of a sudden is to kind of conk out, and he is to lose control of this car. Clark is to then realize that the CDA are coming, and this vehicle needs to uh, move to make it look like it's perfectly okay and it's just on the side of the road. And so Clark is trying to use his super strength to try to move this car, but the car won't budge. So both Pete and Clark together have to figure out a way to move this truck. And at some point they finally do. So we have, of course, uh, Clark, who ends up getting so sick that when uh, Clark is to talk to Lana and mention how uh, Clark would never want to leave home because he would always be worried that one day his mother would disappear, And now that Clark is to, of course, be at this moment when his mother could finally disappear, and Lana's kind of convincing Clark, it's like, well, hey, like, don't think that way, like, she'll come back to you, like, everything will turn out all right. And so all of a sudden, Clark then gets really sick and is to fall over, and so we have Lana who ends up calling Jonathan. Jonathan ends up calling Helen to have them do a doctor's call at home to try and nurse Clark back to health. And Jonathan is trying to convince Helen that she can't go on and get a blood sample from Clark, but she does anyways. And Jonathan is to try to say that Helen is going to have to go and do the lab work on her own because when she looks at Clark's blood, she'll understand why. And when Helen does, she realizes, okay, yeah, this makes whole lot of sense. And so Helen ends up going and taking this paperwork and kind of hiding it from Lex as Lex makes his way into Helen's office to find that she's hiding something from him. And so Lex goes on and tries to get this file about Martha's uh, medical records from this other guy so he can find out about Martha and see what's wrong with her. But so we have Clark that is to finally take a sick day at school. And so Chloe ends up getting very concerned to the point of her going on to be at Clark's house. And so, considering Clark has never been sick before, Chloe sees that as a massive red flag. So, Chloe ends up confessing her love to Clark while Clark is sleeping. And so she ends up having this whole poetic way of saying how much she loves him. And I was like, man, like, this does feel like a random combination of a bunch of stuff from a bunch of movies that are all to be used here. And she ends up talking about disguises and all this kind of stuff that, like, it does sound good at certain points, but again, a lot of it also sounds from any romantic movie that you've ever heard in your life. But still, I thought it was rather good. So Chloe goes on and is to pour her heart out to Clark just for Clark while he's sleeping to then say the words Lana. And that all of a sudden has Chloe start to tear up and is to walk away, realizing that all Clark will ever care about is Lana, with the exclusion of a number of seasons later, where it seems that finally Clark will go on to find another woman that will not be Chloe for him to be with. Uh, Foreshadowing so many things that I have to go on and do. So, we then, in the next episode, not this episode, but the next episode, we have Chloe telling Lana what had happened when Chloe had poured her heart out to Clark, and Clark had said the words Lana in his sleep. And so Chloe says all of this because Lana was to be downloading something for her class, but then sees that Lana has this file labeled CK, and she's like, well, what does this mean? So Lana goes into Chloe's computer and finds the photos of Chloe and Clark at this dance, and Chloe's like, well, hey, like, you're looking through, like, my private file, and Lana's like, oh, well, like, I didn't know, and so Chloe ends up talking to Lana about what she had done, and so we really start to see the friction between both Chloe and Lana to the point where Lana's thinking like, well, like, I don't know if I really want to continue to live with Chloe and her father because, yeah, like, it's great and all, but, like, I don't feel like I'm family there. It just feels like I'm just another person living there. And at some point by the end of episode 17, we have uh we have Chloe that ends up having in her family tree Lana's name in it, because to say that Chloe considers Lana to be a sister to her, and Lana's like, "Oh, you think of me as a sister." So, we also have a thing that happens by the end of this episode, which I think I will probably have to get to soon, but we'll get there. So, uh, so Jonathan is to hear from these doctors that Martha's health is declining and he needs to figure out something to do. So Jonathan is to run off to the CDA facility to try to get that octagonal shaped thing back so they can get the ship working, so they can figure out to get this ship to go to where Martha is, to hope that this ship will heal her like it did before. So Clark, who is now healthy enough to speak to Jonathan, is to say, it's like, well, hey, like, how about I go with you? And Jonathan's like, no, Clark, you're still sick. Stay at home. Like, I'll figure something out. So Jonathan makes his way to this facility and gets the octagonal shape, but it seems there's a military guy who stops Jonathan. And so Clark ends up going on and taking this fire extinguisher and murdering this military officer. He kills him. Obviously. It's not like we don't see the guy waking up and he's like, oh yeah, that really hurt. No, this guy is dead. Clark killed him. So hence why all the military are chasing after them because they killed that man. So because Clark hit him too hard, he used his power because like Clark didn't know because he was still sick. So Clark and Jonathan are running away from this facility that all the bells and whistles are firing. And so, come to find out, they do the switcheroo where when the military is to find the driver of the truck, we find that Pete is there instead of Jonathan and Clark. So, Jonathan and Clark make their way to the hospital just in time because Martha is soon going to die. So Helen rushes into the room where Martha is to try to revive her and defibrillate her, but it seems that this all is to work out for naught as Martha is to flatline, and so it seems that Helen is tempted to just call it, to say Martha's dead. So we have the ship that flies to where Martha is because I guess the ship knows. And so the ship ends up healing Martha and resurrecting her. And then the ship gets back to the truck. And so we, of course, have, after like the whole celebration of Martha now getting better, um, we have Clark who makes his way to the Talon as Chloe is to talk to Clark briefly and then want to go on and buy raffles to get this computer. And come to find out, Lana was to find the letter that Chloe read to Clark, and Chloe read all of it and was like, wow, like whatever Chloe was saying here was really profound. And so Lana is to go on and say that some people have a better way of words than Lana has, kind of pointing at Chloe. And because of course Lana is to tell Clark, it's like, well, yeah, like I couldn't go on and see you while you were sick, and Clark is like, well, that's fine, like, and so we also had Clark, who was to be very appreciative of Chloe, who was to see him while he was sick, and you would think that Clark would just like would have gone on and do something extra, like hug Chloe, or like at least like do something more than just like thank her. Just be like, you know what, like we haven't hung out in a while. Like how about like we go on and just hang out? Like just like yeah, it might just be friends, but like let's hang out again. Um, like wouldn't that have been just a nice gesture? So, anyways, so we have Clark who talks to Chloe or Lana. Um, and Solana is mentioning how like uh, Chloe may be better off for Clark, but that's just not how things are going to be because Clark just likes Lana and that's all he's focused on. So that, of course, is technically the way that this episode is to end. Um, so let's go on into episode 17. So, episode 17, we have Clark, who is to supposedly be dreaming that he's flying around and he's flying into the cave with the octagonal shape to then open the cave to get the Kryptonian secrets. So all of a sudden we find out that Clark didn't do any of these things we have to assume. Instead, Clark's to wake up in the middle of the road somewhere to almost get run over or run down by Lex's car. Lex luckily stops it just in time to see Clark right in front of him. And so Lex is saying, like, hey, Clark, like, you okay? And Clark is like, yeah, I think I'm fine. So all of a sudden, Clark is to make his way back home where Jonathan and Martha like, hey, like did you sneak off in the middle of the night? Like I thought we taught you better than that kind of thing. And so Clark is to go on and tell Martha and Jonathan like what happened to him, that he was sleepwalking. Maybe he wasn't completely walking the whole time, maybe he was flying. And so Martha and Jonathan is like, well, hey, like this is just another problem that we're gonna have to figure out. And Clark is just like, well, yeah, but like for some reason Clark is to be very tempted into putting that paperweight into that part of the cave to see what it'll do. And Martha and Jonathan is like, well, I don't know if you should go on and do that. Like think of the risk, Clark. So Clark goes on to school, and while talking to Chloe and Lana, all of a sudden he starts to hear this like nails on a chalkboard kind of sound. And Clark starts asking Chloe and Lana, it's like, hey, do you hear that? And they're both like, no. So Clark realizes that he's going to need to leave school to chase down what this sound is, and come to find out the sound is, of course, the octagonal shape uh, wanting to go on and tell Clark to take this and put it into the cave, which of course Clark does, or otherwise this nails on the chalkboard like sound would still be going on. So Clark then puts the octagonal shape into the cave and ends up getting hit uh, with this with this thing upon his chest that is to infuse him with all this Kryptonian knowledge, which is to understand what the Kryptonian language means. So we have Lex that is to shake Clark awake in this cave, and Clark makes an excuse that he was here trying to help out Dr. Walden with some research, and Dr. Walden ends up making his way into the cave, and we, of course, have Walden who's like, why is this guy still here? Like, what use is he really? And Lex is just like, no, like, I think he knows something way more than he's telling us. And Walden's like, yeah, so what? Like he has to produce results. So, anyways, so we then push on to have Clark, who is at home by the barn, with him and Jonathan just kind of tossing in hay into this truck, and all of a sudden Clark is to use his heat vision on the barn, and he ends up putting on this Kryptonian symbol on the barn. Chloe just so happens to be there just in time to snag the picture of this Kryptonian symbol to put it in the newspaper, and it seems that Clark becomes upset with Chloe because it's like, well, hey, like there's a number of Area 51 people who are coming by my house, and so like thanks Chloe for getting all the weirdos over by my house. And Chloe's like, well, it could be like some kind of alien thing we don't know. And Clark is like, well, maybe it's just a prank or it's some hoax. And Chloe's like, I don't know either. But Chloe then goes on to tell uh, Clark that he had gotten a mass number of emails, all from this Dr. Swan guy. And so Clark is like, well, really? So he starts to look into one, and one of the emails is to uh, decipher what the Kryptonian symbol means, and says hope. And Clark is like, like this guy's right. So uh, so we too have a moment also where Clark is at the Talon, and he is to have this family tree paper that he's supposed to fill out, and we have all these Kryptonian symbols that are by uh, all of these things. And while Lana is starting to talk to Clark, Lana is to ask him about his paper, and he's like, "Oh yeah," like, and he starts to crumple it up and throw it in the trash. So Clark is to finally give Lana a secret that he's going to want to try and find out information about his biological parents, and like regardless of how his parents feels, like he really wants to keep pushing to see what he can find. And Lana's like, well, that's great. So when Clark is to run off, we find out that Lex was to spot this paper that Clark tried to throw away, and we have Lex who gives this piece of paper to Walden, and Walden's like, where did you get this paperwork from? And Lex is say it's like, well, Clark, of course. And Walden's like, well, how can we really trust that this is to really be anything true? And Lex is just like, well, like look at it as a template, like to maybe see if any of these things are to be right. And so Walden again more and more ticked off. So we have Clark, who goes on to find out that Mr. or Dr. Swan is interested in him. And so Clark ends up getting this laptop from Pete to continue to talk to Dr. Swan through these emails. And Clark has to answer one of the emails of this Kryptonian text, and the text ends up saying that this guy wants to be Clark's friend. So we have Clark that tells his parents about him talking to Dr. Swan. And Jonathan's like, well, I don't know if you should go and actually meet with this guy because so many people in the past have just wanted to exploit you, Clark, and we're trying to protect you. And Clark is like, well, yeah, but like, what if I never go on and like I never go and see if people really do have answers for me and I just shut them down and shut them out? And they're like, well, yeah, that does make sense, but like, still, like, be on the side of caution. So Clark goes on to meet with Dr. Swan, and so come to find out, Dr. Swan is to have this first message, and he is to read it off to Clark, stating that um, this is Kal-El, the son of Krypton, and like please protect him, like uh, as we have loved him, and so on and so forth. And Clark is to all of a sudden be like, well, that message is nice, but like, how can I trust? Uh, how can I trust this? And we of course have Dr. Swan that is to mention that meteor shower had sent them this message, and it took him forever to decrypt it, and because he had sent a message trying to find any intelligent life, and that was the only message that was sent back. So we have Dr. Swan that actually has a second message for Clark, and Clark is kind of hesitant about continuing to speak to Dr. Swan, as he's like, I don't know if you're really telling me the truth. I don't know if I can trust you. So Clark starts to walk off, and Dr. Swan tells Clark, it's like, well, hey, like, if you continue to walk, like, there is no coming back. Like, if you leave here, like, and like, I'm never going to like have you come back here again. So Clark wants to stay here because he feels that he can get answers. So, and also that there is a second message, and Clark is really interested in what it is. So Clark gets the second message, and he reads it, and he's like, all right, okay, all right. So come to find out also, uh, there is a map that shows where Krypton was, and to realize that like Clark is to be completely all alone by himself. So Clark is to, after talking to Swan and talking about all this, we then have Clark, who is in the cellar by himself, and Jonathan ends up going on and talking to Clark. And Clark ends up telling Jonathan, it's like, well, like, I was thinking that maybe I wasn't alone, that I wasn't the only Kryptonian, but now that Clark had talked to Dr. Swan, he realizes that he's completely alone. It's like, well, just wait till a number of seasons later, and you'll get a cousin. And you'll get your dad. And you'll get other Kryptonian consolation prizes along the way. Just wait, Clark. You'll get a number of things. You'll get a number of consolation prizes uh, for you thinking that you're going to be all alone in the world. But so Jonathan is to comfort Clark by telling him, it's like, well, yeah, like, like you may be the only Kryptonian, but um, but Clark, we're your parents and we'll love you and we'll always love you, and like you won't be alone in that way. So we have Clark that is to figure out that one piece from before, that Clark is to realize that this piece is to be the heart of the ship and that he needs to reconnect it. And Clark ends up saying that he thinks that he can't go on and do this alone, and that they should go on and they should do this together. So they put the octagonal shape in the ship, and then they put the heart piece back into the ship, and all of a sudden the ship starts having these symbols glowing, and Jonathan ends up turning to Clark and saying like, "Well, hey, like I never would have realized that you were that small at some point uh, when the ship brought you to us." So the ship is to have all these glowing symbols, and Clark starts reading it, and he's like, "What planet am I from?" And Jonathan's like, "What do you mean?" And Clark is to say that the symbols are to state that Clark was to come here to rule and conquer over the humans. And we, of course, have Jonathan that's just like, well, like, regardless of what that says, like, you didn't follow that. You didn't follow that message. Like, you went on and you just became one of us instead of trying to take over us, take over the planet, whatever. Like you chose um like the good moral way to live here and be with us. So we then have Clark and Jonathan who end up hugging it out, and we have Jonathan who's kind of one eye on Clark, but then on the other eye, looking at the ship and just being like, "Yeah, like what is up with Clark's parents?" Kind of, and possibly his brain. And Jonathan is also like hugging on his dad, but then he's also just kind of like worried about what Clark's biological parents meant for him to do here. So with that said, that's the way of which that this episode is to wrap up in my brain. Let me know in the comments below if there's something that I forgot about, because I'm sure that there probably is. There might have even been a thing that I said that I was going to talk about in here. Maybe I forgot about it. Not quite sure. There was a lot of stuff to cover within these two episodes. There's a bunch of dialogue going on. Um, But yeah, in the best way possible, I tried to cover all of this. So with that said, let me know in the comments below how you felt about these episodes. This one went bizarrely a lot quicker, and I don't know why. um, More than likely, there might have been a number of jokes or a number of things that I was to say through other reviews. Not quite sure, but I think I'm just gonna quickly just get out of here. Because I feel that more than likely I probably forgot a ton of things, and that's why this video is quicker than normal. Don't know. But anyways, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.